The hardest people to love are often the ones who need it the most. The ceramic coffee mug shattered against the polished hardwood floor, sending dark coffee across the expensive rug like spilled ink. No one in the room flinched. They had seen this before. The young caregiver standing beside the wheelchair swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she stared at the broken pieces at her feet. Ethan Carter didn't even look at her. His cold blue eyes remained fixed on the rain sliding down the massive windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The city skyline disappeared behind a curtain of gray clouds, matching the mood that seemed permanently trapped inside the billionaire's mansion. "Get out," Ethan said quietly. The caregiver blinked. "Mr. Carter, I was only trying to help." "That's exactly the problem." His voice sharpened. "I don't need your help." The woman opened her mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. Everyone eventually did. She grabbed her purse, wiped away a tear before anyone noticed, and hurried toward the front door. 30 seconds later, the sound of the door closing echoed through the enormous house. Silence returned. Ethan stared out the window again. Another one gone. The 12th caregiver in less than a year. His house manager stood nearby, arms crossed. Margaret Lewis had worked for the Carter family for nearly 20 years. She had watched Ethan transform from an ambitious young entrepreneur into one of the youngest billionaires in the Pacific Northwest. She had also watched him become a stranger after the accident. "You know," Margaret said carefully, "most people would at least pretend to be polite before firing someone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't hire her." "No, you just made sure she wouldn't stay." He didn't answer, because she was right. The truth was simple. Ethan Carter wanted to be left alone. The mansion was large enough to hold 20 people comfortably. Most days, it held only him. That was exactly how he preferred it. The physical therapists came and went. Nurses came and went. Assistants came and went. Friends stopped calling. Business associates stopped visiting. Even distant relatives eventually gave up trying. One by one, everyone left. Ethan made sure of it. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the grandfather clock near the staircase ticked steadily, filling the empty spaces between conversations. Margaret sighed. "There's someone new coming tomorrow." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Then she'll leave by Friday." "Maybe. Definitely." Margaret walked toward the broken mug and began picking up the larger pieces. "Not everyone quits, Ethan." For the first time, he looked away from the window. "They do eventually." His voice carried something deeper than anger. Something heavier. Loneliness wrapped so tightly around grief that even he could no longer tell the difference. Margaret noticed it. She always did. But she said nothing. Some wounds couldn't be forced open. Ethan turned his wheelchair toward the elevator that connected the mansion's 3 floors. The custom-built chair moved smoothly across the hardwood. Expensive technology. Precision engineering. Millions of dollars at his disposal. Yet none of it could buy back the life he had lost. Before entering the elevator, he paused. "Cancel tomorrow." Margaret didn't look up. "No." Ethan frowned. "No. No." She stood and carried the broken mug toward the kitchen. "Her name is Claire Bennett. I don't care. Single mother. 29 years old." Ethan pressed the elevator button. "Still don't care. Has a 6-year-old son." The elevator doors opened. Ethan rolled inside without responding. But Margaret noticed the brief hesitation before he moved. Just a fraction of a second. Most people would never have seen it. She did. The door slid shut. Upstairs, Ethan entered the master suite that occupied nearly the entire 3rd floor. The room was larger than most apartments. Elegant. Immaculate. Empty. He moved toward the window overlooking the rain-soaked city. Thousands of lights flickered below. Millions of people living their lives. Laughing. Arguing. Falling in love. Building families. Moving forward. Ethan felt none of it. The mansion felt colder than usual that night. Or maybe it was simply the realization that tomorrow another stranger would walk through those doors believing she could help him. Just like all the others. Just like everyone before. What Ethan Carter didn't know was that Claire Bennett wasn't coming because she believed she could save a billionaire. She was coming because she needed a paycheck. And unlike everyone else, she had already survived someone far more difficult than a broken man hiding behind a wheelchair. The next morning arrived wrapped in cold mist and steady rain. Claire Bennett tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her aging Honda as the mansion came into view beyond a set of wrought iron gates. It looked less like a home and more like a luxury resort hidden behind towering evergreens. She glanced at the gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty and exhaled slowly. Rent was due in 12 days. No one needed new sneakers. The electric bill sat unopened on her kitchen counter. This job was not optional. It was necessary. The security guard checked her identification before allowing her through. As she drove up the long, winding driveway, she noticed how quiet everything seemed. No children playing. No visitors arriving. No signs of life beyond the perfectly trimmed landscape and expensive architecture. The place felt beautiful and lonely at the same time. Inside the mansion, Margaret Lewis greeted her with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming." Claire removed her raincoat. "Thank you for having me." Margaret studied her carefully. Most applicants arrived nervous. Claire looked tired but calm. There was a difference. "Before we begin, I should warn you." Claire laughed softly. "You are about to tell me that Mr. Carter is difficult." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" "I read the reviews left by previous caregivers." For the first time that morning, Margaret smiled genuinely. "Then you know what you are walking into." Claire nodded. "I do." Upstairs, Ethan sat in his office overlooking the city. The financial reports on his desk remained untouched. He heard footsteps approaching and immediately felt irritation building. Another caregiver. Another stranger pretending they understood him. Another person who would eventually leave. A knock sounded at the door. "Go away," he called. The door opened anyway. Ethan looked up. Sharply, Claire stood in the doorway holding a folder. She appeared younger than he expected. Simple navy sweater. Dark jeans. Blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail. No expensive jewelry. No forced smile. No nervous chatter. "I said go away." Claire stepped inside. "Good morning to you too." Ethan blinked. Most people apologized when he snapped at them. She sounded mildly amused. "You can leave now." Claire set the folder on a nearby table. "Actually, I cannot." "Why not?" "Because I drove 43 minutes in the rain to get here." Ethan stared at her. Claire continued. "And because my car needs brakes." Silence filled the room. Then Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That is your argument." "It is the truth." Ethan almost laughed despite himself. "Almost. You think honesty is going to impress me?" Claire shrugged. "No. I think honesty saves time." She walked toward the window and glanced at the skyline. "Nice view." Ethan's jaw tightened. Nobody casually commented on the view during an interview. Most people spent the first 10 minutes trying to earn his approval. Claire seemed completely uninterested in the game. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "A billionaire." "And?" "A man in a wheelchair." Ethan's expression darkened. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. "And a person who clearly wants everyone to leave him alone." The room became very still. Even the rain against the glass seemed quieter. Margaret watched from the doorway, preparing for the explosion that usually followed moments like this. Instead, Ethan simply stared. Claire crossed her arms. "Look, Mr. Carter. I need a paycheck. You need assistance. We do not have to like each other today." Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not respect. Not trust. Curiosity. It irritated him immediately. "You assume I need assistance." Claire nodded toward the untouched coffee sitting beyond his reach on a side table. "I assume you are stubborn." Margaret covered her mouth to hide a smile. Ethan noticed. So did Claire. For a brief second, something almost human flickered through the cold atmosphere of the room. Then it vanished. Ethan turned his wheelchair toward the window again. "You will quit by Friday." Claire picked up her folder. "Maybe." Ethan smirked faintly. "At least you are realistic." Claire headed toward the door before stopping. "One thing, Mr. Carter." He did not turn around. "What?" Her answer came gently. "The people who leave are not always the ones who give up first." The following morning, Claire arrived 5 minutes early carrying a small notebook and a paper cup of coffee she had purchased from a gas station on the way. The mansion was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system and the distant sound of rain tapping against the windows. Margaret met her near the kitchen and handed her a neatly typed schedule. Claire scanned the page. Physical therapy appointments. Medication reminders. Business calls. Meal times. Everything organized down to the minute. "He follows all of this?" Claire asked. Margaret gave a knowing look. "Not even a little." Claire smiled. "That makes more sense." Upstairs, Ethan was already waiting. Or perhaps watching. Claire could not tell. He sat near the window in the same position as the day before, the Seattle skyline hidden behind low gray clouds. His expression suggested he had spent the entire night searching for reasons to dislike her. "You came back," he said. Claire set down her notebook. "You seem disappointed." "I am surprised." "There is a difference." Ethan folded his arms. "Not always." Claire walked toward a side table where several unopened envelopes sat in a stack. Past due notices, charity invitations, medical reports. She noticed he had not touched any of them. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked sharply, looking around. "Why?" "Because I work here." Ethan let out a short laugh without humor. "You have been here less than 24 hours. Claire picked up one envelope. "And already I can tell nobody tells you the truth." The comment landed harder than she intended. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." Claire placed the envelope back exactly where she found it. "Everybody walks on eggshells around you. Maybe they are smart. Maybe they are afraid." Silence settled between them. Margaret quietly disappeared from the room. She had learned long ago that certain conversations needed space. Ethan turned his wheelchair slightly. "You think you have me figured out?" Claire shook her head. "No, I think you have everyone else figured out." That answer seemed to catch him off guard. Before he could respond, a phone call came through his office speaker. Ethan accepted it immediately. For the next 20 minutes, Claire sat quietly near the bookshelf while he discussed company acquisitions, market forecasts, and executive decisions worth millions of dollars. His voice changed completely. Calm, precise, confident. The bitterness disappeared. For the first time, Claire saw traces of the man he used to be. When the call ended, Ethan noticed her watching. "What?" Claire tilted her head. "You sound different when you work." "Different how?" "Alive." Ethan looked away first. The observation bothered him more than it should have. Later that afternoon, Claire accompanied him to a physical therapy session inside the mansion's private rehabilitation room. The therapist, Dr. Simmons, arrived carrying equipment and charts. Ethan immediately became difficult. Every suggestion was met with resistance. Every exercise was dismissed. Every encouraging comment was rejected. After 40 minutes, even the patient therapist seemed exhausted. "We are making progress," Dr. Simmons said gently. "No, you are making progress," Ethan replied. "I am wasting my time." Claire watched quietly from the corner. Most people would have stepped in. She did not. She simply observed. Eventually, the session ended. Dr. Simmons packed his equipment and left with a tired smile. Ethan rolled toward the elevator without saying a word. Claire followed. "You could have helped," he said suddenly. "Could I?" "That is your job." Claire considered the question. "No, my job is not to argue with you." Ethan stopped near the elevator doors. "Then what is your job?" Claire thought for a moment. "To be here." The doors opened. Ethan stared at her as if she had spoken another language. Nobody had ever described the role that way. They either wanted to fix him, motivate him, encourage him, or save him. Claire seemed interested in something simpler. Presence. Nothing more. Nothing less. That evening, after she finished organizing medication schedules and updating reports, Claire gathered her things to leave. Ethan remained near the window overlooking the dark city below. She paused at the doorway. "See you tomorrow." Ethan did not turn around. "You keep saying that." Claire smiled. "Because I mean it." After she left, the mansion became quiet again. Yet something felt different. Ethan could not explain it. The silence no longer felt quite as empty. And for the first time in a very long time, he found himself wondering whether someone would actually return in the morning. 3 days later, Claire arrived nearly 20 minutes later than usual. The moment she stepped through the front door, she knew something felt different. Margaret was waiting in the foyer with an expression that mixed apology and concern. "I am so sorry," Claire said, brushing rainwater from her coat. The elementary school called. Noah's after-school program closed unexpectedly because of a plumbing issue. Margaret's face softened immediately. "Is everything all right?" "Mostly. I could not find anyone to watch him." Before Margaret could answer, a small voice echoed from behind Claire. "Mom, this house is huge." Noah Bennett stepped into view carrying a worn blue backpack almost half his size. His sandy blonde hair was slightly messy from the rain, and his curious eyes immediately began exploring the grand staircase, crystal chandelier, and towering ceilings above him. Margaret smiled despite herself. "You must be Noah." "Yes, ma'am. You have good manners." Noah grinned. "My mom says manners are free, so we can always afford them." Margaret laughed, something that rarely happened inside the mansion anymore. Upstairs, Ethan heard the unfamiliar voice. He frowned. Visitors were rare. Children were practically non-existent. Curious despite himself, he rolled toward the hallway overlooking the foyer below. From the second-floor balcony, he spotted Claire speaking with Margaret while a small boy stood beside her. Ethan immediately turned around. Absolutely not. He had spent years building walls around his life. The last thing he wanted was a child running through them. 10 minutes later, Claire gently knocked on his office door. "Come in," Ethan called. The moment she entered, he noticed she looked slightly nervous for the first time. "What happened?" Claire took a breath. "I need a favor." Ethan nearly laughed. "That sounds dangerous." "My son's program closed unexpectedly." Ethan already knew where this was going. "No." Claire blinked. "You do not even know what I was going to ask. You want him to stay here?" "Yes." "No." Claire folded her arms. "He is 6 years old." "Still no." "He is coloring books." Ethan stared at her. "That is your argument." "They are very quiet coloring books." Ethan rubbed his forehead. For some reason, this conversation felt absurdly normal. "Claire." "Ethan." "Do not call me Ethan." "Then stop acting like this is a hostage negotiation." Somewhere deep inside the mansion, Margaret nearly choked trying not to laugh after overhearing that exchange. Ethan sighed heavily. "One day." Claire smiled. "One day." An hour later, Noah sat at a small table in the library surrounded by crayons, paper, and enough books to fill a small-town bookstore. The mansion fascinated him, not because it was luxurious, but because it felt like a place from a storybook. Every room seemed to hold secrets. Every hallway stretched farther than expected. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. While Claire organized medical schedules in another room, Noah wandered into the sunroom overlooking the gardens. There he found Ethan sitting alone beside a floor-to-ceiling window. The billionaire was reviewing documents on a tablet. Neither noticed the other immediately. Noah studied him quietly. Then he noticed the wheelchair. Then the serious expression. Then the way Ethan stared outside, as if he was waiting for something that never came. "Hi." Ethan looked up. Noah stood a few feet away holding a box of crayons. Ethan immediately prepared for awkward questions or uncomfortable sympathy. Adults always did one or the other. Instead, Noah simply walked closer. "I am Noah." Ethan nodded once. "Ethan." Noah glanced at the wheelchair. "Does it go fast?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "The wheelchair." Noah pointed. "Does it go fast?" For several seconds, Ethan did not answer. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Fast enough." Noah looked impressed. "Cool." And just like that, the conversation continued in a direction Ethan Carter never saw coming. Noah climbed onto the chair across from Ethan and placed his box of crayons on the table between them as if they had known each other for years. Ethan waited for the usual questions adults often asked through children. "What happened to your legs? Are you sad? Do you miss your old life?" Instead, Noah opened a coloring book and pulled out a green crayon. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Ethan stared at him. "I have never really thought about it." Noah looked genuinely concerned. "How can you not think about dinosaurs?" For the first time in weeks, an unfamiliar sound escaped Ethan. It was not quite a laugh, but it was close. Noah immediately noticed. "There. You almost smiled." Ethan shook his head. "Do not get used to it." Too late. The boy returned to coloring. For the next 20 minutes, the room remained surprisingly peaceful. Rain tapped softly against the glass while Noah worked on an extremely green dinosaur that looked nothing like any species that had ever existed. Ethan found himself watching the child more than reading the reports on his tablet. There was something unusual about Noah. He did not seem impressed by wealth. He did not care about titles. To him, Ethan was simply another person sitting in the room. Eventually, Noah looked up. "Are you lonely?" Ethan nearly dropped the tablet. The question arrived so suddenly and so honestly that he had no defense prepared. "That is a strange thing to ask." Noah shrugged. "Mom says people who spend a lot of time alone are usually lonely or they really like silence." "And what do you think?" Noah considered it carefully. "You do not look like you like silence." Ethan looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Something about the answer lingered longer than it should have. Before he could respond, Claire appeared in the doorway. She froze slightly at the sight before her. Noah was sitting comfortably beside Ethan as if this had become a daily routine. More surprising was the fact that Ethan had not sent him away. "Everything okay?" Claire asked cautiously. Noah smiled. "We are discussing dinosaurs." Claire blinked. "Of course you are." Ethan cleared his throat. Your son asks unusual questions. That is because he thinks unusual thoughts. Noah nodded proudly. Mom says that is a gift. Claire laughed softly. Sometimes. As the afternoon continued, Noah followed Claire around the mansion while she completed her work. Yet he kept finding reasons to wander back toward Ethan. At one point he appeared carrying a small paper bag from his backpack. I saved you one. Ethan frowned. Save me what? Noah handed over a chocolate chip cookie. Mom made them. Ethan stared at the cookie as though it were a complicated business proposal. Nobody had given him something this simple in a very long time. Most gifts arrived wrapped in obligation. This one arrived wrapped in kindness. You do not have to give me your cookie. Noah looked confused. I know. Ethan accepted it slowly. Hours later, as evening approached, Claire finished her final tasks and gathered their belongings. Noah stood near the front door, putting on his jacket. Before leaving, he hurried back toward Ethan one last time. Bye. Ethan nodded. Goodbye, Noah. The boy hesitated. You know, if your wheelchair ever runs out of batteries, I can push you. Ethan stared at him. Noah was completely serious. I am stronger than I look. Claire covered her mouth to hide a smile. Even Margaret turned away to conceal her laughter. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then something remarkable happened. Ethan smiled. A real one. Small, brief, but unmistakably real. Noah grinned as if he had just accomplished an important mission. After they left, the mansion settled back into its usual quiet. Yet the silence felt different now. Less heavy, less cold. Ethan rolled toward the window overlooking the city. On the table beside him sat the half-eaten cookie Noah had given him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he found himself doing something he had not done in years. He looked forward to tomorrow. The following week brought an unexpected stretch of sunshine to Seattle. Pale morning light spilled across the mansion's windows, illuminating rooms that had felt gray for months. Claire noticed the difference immediately. Not in the weather. In Ethan. The change was subtle enough that most people would have missed it. He still kept conversations short. He still complained during physical therapy. He still spent hours staring out the window. Yet something had shifted. The bitterness no longer filled every corner of the room. One afternoon, Claire was updating medical records in the library while Ethan reviewed company reports nearby. The mansion was unusually quiet. Noah was at school. Margaret had gone into the city. For nearly an hour, neither spoke. Then Ethan suddenly closed the folder in front of him. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Claire looked up. Ethan's expression had changed. His eyes seemed distant, fixed on something she could not see. What happened? She asked softly. Ethan gave a humorless smile. You always ask that. Because something always happens before you get that look. For a long moment he said nothing. Claire returned to her paperwork, giving him space. She had learned that pushing only made him retreat further. Several minutes passed before Ethan finally spoke. Do you know what everyone gets wrong? Claire glanced up. About what? About the accident. The room grew still. Claire set down her pen. This was the first time Ethan had voluntarily mentioned it. What did they get wrong? Ethan rolled slowly toward the window. Outside, sunlight reflected off the distant waters of Puget Sound. The view was breathtaking. He barely noticed. People think losing the use of my legs is what destroyed me. His voice remained calm, but Claire could hear the strain underneath. That is what the newspapers wrote. That is what the interviews assumed. That is what every therapist wanted to discuss. Claire remained silent. Ethan continued. The truth is much simpler. He stared out at the horizon. The wheelchair is not the hardest part. Claire felt her chest tighten. Ethan rarely revealed anything real. When he did, every word seemed heavy. Then what is? She asked quietly. Ethan closed his eyes. For several seconds, the only sound came from the ticking clock on the wall. 3 years ago, my younger sister Emily was in the car with me. Claire froze. Ethan had never mentioned a sister. She was 28. His voice softened. Funny. Smart. Impossible to embarrass. She used to call me every Sunday whether I answered or not. A faint smile appeared and vanished just as quickly. She believed every problem in the world could be solved with coffee and stubborn optimism. Claire listened carefully. Ethan rarely spoke this much. That day we were driving to meet our parents for dinner. He swallowed hard. We never made it. Silence settled over the room. Ethan's hands tightened slightly against the armrests of his wheelchair. I survived. The words barely rose above a whisper. She did not. Claire felt her heart sink. Suddenly so many things made sense. The isolation, the anger, the guilt, the way Ethan pushed everyone away before they could leave him first. For years, people had focused on the visible injury while ignoring the invisible one. Ethan laughed softly, though there was no joy in it. Everybody tells me the accident was not my fault. His gaze remained fixed outside. I have heard that sentence thousands of times. Do you believe them? Claire asked. Ethan answered immediately. No. The honesty in that single word filled the room. Claire stood and walked closer to the window. Not too close. Just enough. Noah misses his father sometimes, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. You never talk about him. There is not much to say. Claire folded her arms. He left when Noah was very young. Ethan waited. Claire looked out toward the city. For years I blamed myself. I thought if I had been different, smarter, prettier, more successful, maybe he would have stayed. Ethan said nothing. Eventually I realized something. Claire smiled sadly. Guilt likes to pretend it is logic. Ethan turned toward her. Claire met his gaze. Just because something hurts does not mean it is your fault. Neither spoke after that. Yet for the first time since Claire had entered his life, Ethan did not look away. The conversation stayed with Ethan long after Claire left that evening. For the first time in years, someone had challenged the guilt he carried without trying to erase it. Most people rushed to reassure him. Claire had simply listened. Somehow that felt far more dangerous. The next few days passed quietly. Spring sunlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows. Noah visited twice after school, filling the enormous rooms with questions, laughter, and observations nobody else would dare make. Ethan found himself expecting those visits more than he cared to admit. Then everything changed on a Thursday afternoon. Claire arrived looking distracted. Her usual calm seemed strained. Ethan noticed immediately. What happened? He asked. Claire hesitated. Nothing. Ethan almost smiled. Weeks ago he would have accepted that answer. Now he knew better. That is not true. Claire placed several documents on his desk and avoided eye contact. I got a phone call this morning. Something in her tone made his stomach tighten. About Noah? No. About work. Ethan waited. Claire finally looked up. A rehabilitation center in Portland offered me a full-time position. The room fell silent. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees lining the driveway. Inside, Ethan felt something he had not expected. Disappointment. Sharp and immediate. Portland, he asked. Yes. That is 3 hours away. Claire nodded. The salary is better. The benefits are better too. Ethan stared at the papers on his desk without seeing them. Rationally, the news made perfect sense. Claire was a single mother. She deserved stability. She deserved opportunities. She deserved everything that would make life easier for her and Noah. Yet none of those thoughts softened the uncomfortable feeling growing inside him. When would you leave? Claire looked down. 2 weeks. The answer landed harder than it should have. Ethan rolled toward the window, hiding his expression. He hated this feeling. Hated how familiar it was. People always left eventually. Some left because life moved on. Others left because he pushed them away. The result was always the same. Empty rooms. Empty conversations. Empty days. Claire watched his reflection in the glass. You have not said anything. What would you like me to say? His voice sounded colder than he intended. Claire folded her arms. I do not know. Ethan laughed quietly. Congratulations, maybe. Claire frowned. That is not fair. Neither is life. The bitterness surprised even him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Claire gathered the remaining paperwork. I have not accepted yet. Ethan turned sharply. Why not? Claire looked genuinely surprised by the question. Because Noah likes his school here. She paused. And because I wanted time to think. Ethan nodded once. That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, anger began rising unexpectedly. Not at Claire. At himself. At the situation. At the fact that he had started depending on people again. Depending on anyone always ended badly. The rest of the afternoon became tense. Ethan dismissed physical therapy early. He cut short a board meeting. By evening, even Margaret noticed his mood. You are upset. Ethan rolled past her toward the elevator. I am fine. You have never sounded more upset. He stopped. People leave, Margaret. Her expression softened immediately. Not everyone. Ethan looked away. Eventually, that night the mansion felt larger than ever. The silence returned, heavier than before. Ethan sat alone in the darkened sunroom overlooking the city lights. Somewhere across town, Claire was probably helping Noah with homework or making dinner. 2 weeks. The number repeated in his mind like a clock counting down. For years he had convinced himself that isolation was safer. Yet now the possibility of losing two people who had somehow slipped past every defense felt unbearable. And for the first time since the accident, Ethan Carter realized something that frightened him far more than loneliness. He no longer wanted to be alone. The following morning arrived under dark clouds and steady rain. Seattle seemed wrapped in gray from the harbor to the distant mountains. Ethan had barely slept. Every room in the mansion felt filled with the same thought. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until Claire and Noah might disappear from his life. He hated how much the possibility affected him. By noon the rain had become a storm. Wind rattled the tall windows. Tree branches swayed violently outside. Ethan sat alone in the library pretending to review business reports. In reality, he had reread the same page 6 times. Claire had taken the day off to attend an interview in Portland. He had told himself it did not matter. Yet every glance at the clock betrayed him. Around 3 in the afternoon, Margaret entered carrying a worried expression. The weather is getting worse. Ethan looked toward the window. Sheets of rain blurred the landscape. It is Seattle. The highway department is warning people to stay off the roads. Something cold settled in Ethan's stomach. Claire had driven to Portland that morning. Before he could respond, the lights flickered briefly. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The mansion seemed larger and emptier than ever. 4 o'clock came. Then 5. The storm intensified. Ethan found himself checking his phone repeatedly. No messages. No updates. No reason to be concerned. Yet concern continued growing anyway. By 6 o'clock, he was angry with himself. Angry for caring. Angry for worrying. Angry because every hour made him realize how deeply Claire and Noah had become part of his daily life. Then the front door opened. Ethan heard it from across the house. He rolled into the foyer faster than he intended. Claire stood inside, dripping rainwater onto the marble floor. Noah stood beside her holding a bright yellow umbrella that had clearly lost its battle against the storm. Both looked exhausted. Both looked safe. Relief hit Ethan so suddenly it almost took his breath away. Claire blinked in surprise. "You are still here." Ethan frowned. "It is my house." Noah grinned. I think he was worried. I was not. You totally were. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Claire smiled softly. For some reason, that smile felt warmer than the fire crackling in the nearby sitting room. Margaret appeared carrying towels. Thank goodness. This weather is awful. Noah accepted a towel and began drying his hair. Mom drove really slowly. Claire laughed. Because visibility was terrible. Noah nodded seriously. I only got scared twice. Ethan found himself smiling despite everything. Later that evening, after Noah settled into the library with books and hot chocolate, Claire stepped onto the covered terrace overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. Ethan joined her a few minutes later. The storm had softened to a gentle drizzle. City lights shimmered through the mist beyond the trees. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. How did the interview go? Claire looked out toward the dark horizon. They offered me the position. The words landed exactly as he feared. Yet Claire's expression seemed complicated. Not excited. Not relieved. Thoughtful. Ethan nodded slowly. Congratulations. Claire studied him carefully. You do not sound convinced. He laughed quietly. I am trying to be mature about it. That earned the first genuine laugh he had heard from her all week. Then her expression softened. Noah does not want to move. Ethan looked down. Children rarely like change. Neither do adults. The rain continued falling gently around them. Claire folded her arms against the cool evening air. You know something strange? Ethan raised an eyebrow. What? Claire smiled faintly. When I first came here, I could not wait to leave every evening. Ethan looked away. That seems reasonable. Now it feels different. For several seconds, neither moved. The moment felt fragile. Honest. Real. Finally, Noah's voice echoed from inside the house. Mom, come look at this picture. Claire smiled and headed back toward the door. Before stepping inside, she glanced over her shoulder. I have not made my decision yet. Then she disappeared into the warm light of the mansion. Ethan remained on the terrace watching the rain. For the first time in years, hope felt more frightening than despair. Because hope meant there was something left to lose. The decision came 3 days later. Morning sunlight poured through the mansion's windows, casting golden reflections across floors that no longer felt quite so empty. Ethan sat in the sunroom with a cup of coffee beside him, pretending to read financial reports while checking the driveway every few minutes. He was becoming increasingly annoyed with himself. At exactly 9 o'clock, Claire arrived. Noah jumped out of the car. First, racing toward the front door with his backpack bouncing behind him. Ethan noticed immediately that both of them were smiling. His heart began beating faster. Something happened, Margaret whispered from nearby. I can tell. Ethan nodded. So can I. A few moments later, Claire entered the sunroom. She stood quietly for a second before speaking. I made my decision. Ethan placed the report aside. For the first time in years, a business negotiation felt easier than a personal conversation. And Claire smiled. I turned down the job. The words seemed to hang in the air. Ethan stared at her. You did? Claire nodded. The position was wonderful. The salary was wonderful too. She glanced toward the library where Noah's laughter echoed faintly through the hallway. But not everything valuable can be measured on a paycheck. Ethan looked away, overwhelmed by relief he could barely explain. Noah is happy here. Yes. And you? Claire laughed softly. I think I am too. Silence settled between them, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Later that afternoon, Noah appeared carrying a large sheet of paper covered in crayons. I finished it. He proudly unfolded the drawing across Ethan's lap. The picture showed 3 stick figures standing beneath a bright yellow sun. One figure sat in a wheelchair. Another had long blonde hair. The third held both of their hands. Ethan stared at the drawing for a long moment. Who are they? Noah looked confused by the question. Us. Ethan swallowed hard. Noah pointed at the figure in the wheelchair. That is you. Then he pointed at Claire. That is Mom. Finally, he tapped the smallest figure. And that is me. Ethan smiled. I figured that part out. Noah grinned. Good. Then the boy pointed toward the top of the drawing where he had written something in large, uneven letters. Family. Ethan felt emotion rise unexpectedly in his chest. For years he had spent every waking hour trying to recover pieces of the life he lost. The company, the routine, the independence, the future he once imagined. Yet none of those things had healed him. Not really. Healing had arrived in the form of a stubborn single mother who refused to treat him like a broken project and a 6-year-old boy who saw a person before he saw a wheelchair. That evening, the 3 of them sat together on the terrace overlooking the Seattle skyline. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Noah sat beside Ethan holding a small remote control. Ready? The boy asked. Ethan nodded. Noah pressed a button, and the wheelchair moved forward a few feet. The child laughed triumphantly. See? I told you I could help drive. Claire shook her head, smiling. Ethan laughed with them. A real laugh. Unforced. Free. The sound surprised him almost as much as it pleased him. As darkness settled across the city, Ethan looked toward Claire. You know something? What? She asked. He watched the lights appear one by one across the skyline. Everyone spent years trying to fix my legs. Claire remained quiet. Ethan smiled gently. You were the first person who helped heal my heart. For a moment, nobody spoke. They simply watched the city glow beneath the evening sky. And for the first time since losing so much, Ethan no longer measured his life by what had been taken away. He measured it by what had found its way back. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not learning how to walk again. Sometimes it is discovering that you are no longer walking through life alone.